To begin, we have to take a look at the heart of this card, its performance hardware. Galax sets you up with a stock-based clock speed of the 2048 CUDA-core equipped GM204 chip of 1304 MHz and a boost clock speed of a whopping 1418 MHz, which is an impressive 202 MHz over the reference 980. The card's standard setup of 4 GB of 256 GB GDDR5 memory is nudged up a little bit, understandably much less exciting, 10 MHz, resulting in an effective 7010 MHz compared to the reference card's 7000 MHz. The job of cooling all this performance is given to two 80mm fans and one 90mm fan on top of a 7 nickel-plated heat pipe aluminum fin array. 3 of the heat pipes are 6mm and 4 of them are 8mm girth show-offs. Hiding away back here is also a integrated MOSFET heatsink that Galaxy put in as well. And last but not least, there is an absolutely beautiful anodized aluminum backplate, which admittedly doesn't do a whole lot for performance, but really ties the whole card together aesthetically and does offer structural support to help the card not bend under the weight of that heatsink. This cooling setup kept the card at a relatively cool 73 degrees-ish while overclocked and under heavy load on our open test bench. And we don't have an acoustic chamber, but I also wouldn't say that it was unnecessarily loud even in our most stressful tests. Now I'm going to take a moment before moving on to essentially buy some time while you guys get a look at this card and appreciate what Galax has done here aesthetically. Again, with the latest editions of their Hall of Fame series. There's lots of sweet tech inside, including classics like SLI, CUDA, GeForce Experience, and all the new stuff that was introduced with GTX 980, like MFAA, Dynamic Super Resolution, and Delta Color Compression, which you can learn more about in Linus's original 980 launch video by clicking it. Now back to the aesthetic. The only drawback I see here is the slightly beige color of the otherwise great dual 8-pin power connectors that lead to the buff 8-phase power design with 8 phases for GPU and 2 for memory. Moving on, the Galax 980 sticks with reference I/O configuration with 3 full-size DisplayPorts, 1 HDMI, and lastly 1 DVI port. And also back here you may notice the, at first seemingly random, button near the I/O. While it isn't labeled, and I couldn't easily find anything about it in their manual, as they use a reference card for their examples, I was able to eventually identify it as the Hyper Boost button, which essentially increases fan speed and maximum power delivered to the GPU just by pressing it in. If you've decided that you just have far too many famous things and you simply need multiple halls of fame in your computer, the SLI fingers at the top of the card will happily accommodate 2, 3, or even 4 GPUs all linked together. Also at the top of the card there is a large backlit Hall of Fame logo whose brightness and lighting pattern can be controlled through software. And finally, we have one last little switch on the far end of the card, which is, you guessed it, a dual BIOS switch, which should enable you to try out new firmware updates and customize things relatively risk-free. As we have done a whack ton of general overview style reviews on the GTX 980 already, I decided to go with a slightly different route for the benchmarking on this one and went for a 4K gaming shootout between our EVGA classified 980, our Galax Hall of Fame 980, and our Sapphire Vapor X 290X 8GB cards. Overclocking was simple enough. Thanks to this card coming with such an aggressive stock clock, you won't actually have to push it all that hard to get a very respectable overclock. My personal settings were max core voltage and power limit combined with a core clock increase of 90 MHz and a memory clock increase of 300 MHz, which resulted in an effective in-game core clock speed of 1533 MHz. While this isn't quite as high as our EVGA classified 980's overclock of 1570 MHz, it is important to remember that some of this could easily be attributed to the silicon lottery, because not all chips are created equal. As with all of our GPU reviews, we're using our standard test bench, the specs of which you can see on the screen you're looking at right now. And all of the graphics cards used for this test are overclocked, and you can find them and all of my settings for them linked in the description down below, as long as Nick gets his crap together and includes a link for a change. Otherwise, you can find them on the forum. With the fun performance stuff out of the way, let's get to the only question left, which is what's in the box. The answer may shock you. A quick installation guide, a user's manual, 2 8-pin PCI power adapters, 1 DVI to VGA converter, and finally, clearly the most important inclusion, is a do not disturb doorknob hanger. Alright guys,